Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We'd love to hear where you think we got it right and where we completely missed the vibe of the age that we live in. You can do that by visiting unsilentpodcast.com or leave a comment on our Rumble channel or on social media channels as well. So, Brian, the pace of a change on Earth continues fairly rapidly.
Yeah,
and a lot of stuff.
And the much awaited what's it called? Liberation Day is here, and the
Day.
stock market's down 3% after hours as you and I are talking, and
Yeah.
so not enough time has elapsed for us to digest that. We won't get into all that, but
Yep.
I was really hoping you could, because you're way more in tune with this kind of stuff and knowledgeable about the stuff than I am, but the sentencing of Marie Le Pen seems to me like a pretty big deal, and we don't spend a lot of time talking about Europe, but I think it's an integral player in the whole big picture of what's happening. So just kind of walk me through. I know she got sentenced. I know she can't run for office. She's under house arrest for a couple of years, and I think there was some other kind of suspended sentence, if I heard correctly. I don't know, but what was she convicted of? What was the crime against humanity she committed? Like what's going on? I don't understand all this stuff.
Well, so the details are basically this at a very top level. So the European Parliament assigned some money to local or to her party, to all the parties in France and throughout Europe to essentially conduct business, et cetera. So Brussels, the European Union. Now, what Marine Le Pen did is she and her party, the National Rally, or the RN, because it's Rally National in France, what they did is they used it for some of their local French party work, not necessarily the European Parliament party work. Now, so this is one of those things, and we can talk about how this applies across the board, but this is very similar to a lot of the very technical stuff that judges and those that are bringing charges against other figures such as Trump. So we had the 34 felony convictions here that no person could actually explain or justify in terms of like what was the actual crime, what was the heinous moral, who was hurt, all this kind of stuff. So the Marine Le Pen situation is very much similar to that. The reports are that basically what she and her party did was what everybody does. It's kind of the precedent is, there was some commingling of funds between here and there, but it's not like she, took vacations in the Bahamas on the nickel, the dime of the European Union or anything like that. This is it's a technical quote unquote crime. It's one where the judges that were involved went incredibly over the top to impose these sentences, a prison sentence that they've essentially not commuted, but they basically said, oh, you're going to be sort of in a house arrest. You can hang out at your house. Suspended it. She's going to appeal, of course. But here's the real big piece. Part of what they sentenced her to was not being able to run for any public office for 5 years. Now, she is the front-running candidate she's the top most likely candidate to be Emmanuel Macron's successor. So, it is eerily like the things that happened to Trump here, or at the same time, you may have heard in Brazil, Javier Bolsonaro, I think Javier is his first name, was also just recently convicted. You had the Romanian where they threw out the entire election because he won. You can't win. You're far right. You can't win. Can't let
Yeah.
this stand. You go down the list of European countries, of other places in South America where populist candidates are winning. The establishment doesn't like it, and so they do this kind of stuff. Now, the thing that it was shocking to everybody that they would do this in France. It was shocking because of how far. I mean, if you say, well, she did this and she wasn't supposed to do this, we're going to levy a 10,000 euros fine on her or something. Okay, well, fine, whatever. She's going to appeal it. And the other part of this is the extreme nature of saying right now that she can't run from office. They're saying on her prison sentence, we're sort of delaying that. We're not going to enforce it, but while you appeal, but we're not going to allow you to run for office. This part is in force now, even though you're going to appeal it. So you would think that if there's going to be an appeal, it's like, okay, well, suspend the sentence, don't carry out the sentence until the appeal happens. They're not doing that. So rightly, she and a whole bunch of other people are just amazed by it. I'm amazed by it because in France, the French, we like to riot over here, right? In the U.S. we enjoy good riot as much as anybody else. In France, they take it seriously. I mean, go back to some of the French Revolution, and they did some pretty brutal things during their riots.
Yeah.
So not that we're in that day and age.
Yeah, I don't remember us ever bringing guillotines to our riots.
No, we haven't gone that far. But the French have a history, during the Yellow Jacket riots when the prices of fuel were jacked up. I mean, they were on par with let's burn down our city like we did during the George Floyd riots over here.
Yeah.
So this is by no means, in my estimation, over in terms of what it can. She's going to obviously do her appeals and she's going to fight it, and she should, because this is, I mean, even if there was a technical rules violation, the sentencing was just way over the top. And it is clearly, there is absolutely no question by anybody of goodwill that this was done for political reasons. You can't question
Right.
that and be a serious person, just like you can't question most of the others.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm thinking as you're explaining this and is when I lived where you live in Washington State, I got involved not in politics. I got involved in getting a bill written and passed.
Right.
Right. Through that process, I met many lawmakers, lobbyists, and in Washington State, I got quite an education, like it's really like solid civics education as far as how do things quote unquote like really work,
How
right?
they actually work, right?
And one of the things that I met my my state senator for Washington State, where I lived. I won't say his name because I don't want to bring up any issues for him. But one of the things he said, maybe about a year into the process of me meeting all these folks and kind of just getting immersed in that world and learning how Olympia, the capital of Washington, works.
Right.
He said at one point something I really thought about in a long time until you were just kind of walking us through this. The laws in Washington State to run for office are so convoluted as far as how the candidate has to account for money and things like that in their like the money they take in, what they can spend in certain ways. It's so complex and confusing. If I remember correctly, my state senator put a challenge out to people and said, if you can run for office in Washington State without violating any laws, I'll, give $1 million to your charity or choice, or it was some version of that. Like he threw down a challenge to people, show us how you're supposed to do this.
Right.
Because what was happening is some candidates would get ticked on, they'd get violations or fines or whatever, nothing like a prison sentence. I don't remember anything like that, but they would get cited or whatever their version of like, infractions or something like that. Some would get those infractions and some would not.
Right.
Now, in his opinion, it was, just by happenstance, it happened to be fairly conservative people who got those things and not so much for the progressive folks. And, as you know, living in Washington State, the judiciary is very progressive.
Hyper progressive. Yeah.
And so he didn't go as far as hypothesizing that the cards are stacked against you if you're a conservative. He wasn't saying that. What he was saying was it's so complex and so confusing. I don't believe you could run for office
Yeah.
and do it correctly
Yeah.
and knowingly do it. Like you might by luck do it correctly, but you couldn't hire the right consultants or bookkeeping. You couldn't knowingly know how to go about it and do it the right way.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, nobody ever accepted his challenge. And what they all just did is they all just kind of crossed their fingers. And it didn't matter if you're running for governor, if you're running for state legislature,
Sure.
if you're running for the county commissioner or whatever. Mostly he was talking at the state level, but it's my point with all this is these laws are written in such a complicated manner. And I agree that there should be some oversight. I don't think you should be able to take millions of dollars from people and go buy a new house.
Right.
I believe there should be some oversight, but it's so confusing and complicated that they kind of have the ability to get whoever they want. Is my perception. Now, I'm
Yes.
probably painting a very wide brush there, and I get that, but it leads me to the question: are they doing this on purpose, or are they just incompetent? And I don't know which answer would be worse, but it seems to me like it has to kind of be one of those two things that either they want it this way so they can pick and choose who they file infractions or file whatever complaints against, or they just have created a mess and nobody's willing to like fix it. I don't know
I,
which it is, but
well,
my point is this is not a thing for the federal level, and it's not a thing for France. It's happening today in Washington State where you live.
yes, and it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere, and I think it's actually not either or in that of the two that you just mentioned. I think it's both. I think on one hand, it's not possible to write a law that is so comprehensive and so knife edge specific that everything is always going to be clear. It's not possible to do. I mean,
Yeah.
you would have to have a supercomputer, and your speeding laws would have to be 10,000 pages long, and it would have to be interpreted by an omnipotent artificial intelligence to apply them. So because laws are written as generalities, and then we have in every place in the world we've got judges and magistrates and people to interpret the individual cases of those laws. Now, so I said it's both. So on one side, yes, it's very sloppy, and on the other side, people of bad will can use those sloppy edges of the law, or those exceptions, or those it doesn't cover this situation exactly, or we can shoehorn in this thing over here to be able to charge somebody that we don't like. That happens too. Now, let me give you a very practical example of this. So, like in Marine Le Pen's situation, she did what purportedly, and not just she, but her party, the National Rally, did purportedly what everybody does, but she is getting dinged for it. Now, in the United States, there is a law on the books that says the Social Security number is to be used for Social Security purposes, not for anything else. You're not supposed to use a Social Security number on your medical stuff. You're not supposed to use it as to apply for credit, and that is technically not legal. It's not how it was written. It's not how the Social Security Act was originally written, and yet it's done all the time. Now, what's your defense then if somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, Brian, you are using your Social Security number or you're using people's Social Security numbers, your client's Social Security numbers in ways not outlined by the Social Security Act." Well, your response is, "Well, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, the credit card companies do it. Everybody does it." Yeah, Brian, but you're violating the law. So, like in her situation, and in lots of different situations, like the looking at Trump's 34 felony convictions, that on the surface of it, those felony convictions are blatantly stupid, that are well beyond. I mean, you have to shoehorn things in such a way that you can make it marginally plausible, but it doesn't really work. Um,
Right.
but they're able to do that. So the question comes down to the judgment of the judges. And if you're in a place where the judges decide, we don't like you, you're bad for the country, we're going to accept this novel legal theory in order to stop you, you fascist pig, from taking over our country, they'll do that. They'll use it as a pretense, as a pretext,
Yeah.
rather, and they will then do this. Now, you step back from that, you say, okay, well, they're doing this with this pretext. They hope she's going to go away now. She's not going to go away. I mean, and populism is on the rise across the entire world. I mean,
Yeah.
this is they're trying to, like the little Dutch boy going around putting their finger in the dam to prevent it from leaking, but they're not going to be able to do it because, one, there are unintended consequences when you do this kind of thing. I mean, my first reaction when I heard that, my literal gut reaction was the EU is over. It's like, well,
Yeah.
how do you get to that, Dave? How do you get to that? Well, you get to that because you're sending a message to well, you I don't know if you saw Viktor Orban of Hungary. He's a populist leader who's in office right now. He's
Right.
basically, he said, I stand with Marie. Je suis Marine. So I am Marie, or something like that. There's going to be tens of millions of people across the EU who are going to say, this is no good. Let's accelerate our plans for dumping Brussels because Brussels obviously is not representing the people. When the most popular person for the French presidency is prevented right before it happens. So there is a there. It's also it's staggeringly inept of these people to think that it's just like it was staggeringly inept of them to, because it's the same basic ideology that does this. It was a stupid thing for them to do that to Trump because it just made him more popular. Because people look
Well,
at
I heard a story last night. Now the post-mortem on the Biden dismissal and the Harris loss in the
right.
election, those post-mortems are starting to kind of surface. The infighting within the Democratic Party is reaching pretty substantial levels as their
Yes.
popularity. I saw a number down as 21%.
Yeah, it's in the
I've seen
20s.
27, 28%,
Yeah.
something like that. But as their popularity continues to fall, the infighting apparently is getting more egregious.
Yeah.
And one of the things I heard last night, as I was watching TV for a little bit, was on election night, Harris was absolutely convinced she was going to win, much like Hillary Clinton was just very convinced she was going to win.
Sure.
And she was in utter dismay as it unfolded, where she was not only losing, but losing handily,
Yeah.
meaning especially once the popular vote went away, like that's they always had that kind of hang their hats on. My point
Yeah.
is, it seems like these people don't live in a world
Yeah.
that, I don't want to say reality because that's not fair, but they don't seem to be tuned into the risks and the factors that are inconvenient for them,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, as you and I as business owners, we have to operate in the world of what is, not what we wish was.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we go out of business, right?
Yeah.
And so, in a situation like what I was describing in the state of Washington, where you could have people run for office and they would, multiple people every year get these kind of infractions or notifications or that they violate a thing. But what happens is some people get a slap on the wrist and a verbal warning.
Right.
Other people get fines or disqualified from running or whatever
Exactly.
for seemingly pretty similar kinds of things. So you have a handful of people who are deciding who the winners and losers are. They're not calling necessarily balls and strikes.
Right.
It's very partisan. They have
Yep.
biases that don't seem to be able to be removed. And when people say, well, how can you say that? I point to, well, show me the people like Donald Trump who have faced the things he's faced for similar kinds of instances,
Yeah.
except for people who've gone against the party line, like the mayor of New York City, for example.
Right.
Um, there's last year in 2024, there was a number of stories that surfaced about prosecutors doing things that weren't right and things like that, and they just kind of went away.
Yeah.
And then there was things where, like the Trump case, for example, where like it seems like they took a misdemeanor, they got him for doing a thing that they got somebody else for not doing that thing 15
Right.
years ago or
Yeah.
whatever it was,
Yeah.
right? And so it seems like when you have these rules where no matter what, you can find a way to bring somebody down because you're following the law, which you
Right.
are. I'm not saying that they're creating laws out of thin air. I think they
Sure.
are following the law,
Yeah.
but it opens up itself to the discretion of people who have very partisan desires,
Right.
and simultaneously those people are not tuned in to what, again, I want to say reality, but they're not tuned into real world consequences. They're not tuned
Yeah.
into how people actually will react. And so they have this belief that they just take the Le Pens and the Trumps out of the equation. Like people are just like, well, that sucks. We'll just go about our day. And I
Yeah.
don't think that that's reality. Especially
No.
as you point out in France, historically, that is not the case for them. And I would even take it one step further. What citizen of what country would say, we want this other bigger force than our government dictating how we're supposed to live? I don't think that anybody
No.
desires it except for a very, very small percentage of the population who think they have the education and righteousness to make such grand decisions and great decisions that people, of course I would want that. I don't think people actually want that.
No, and I don't think people have wanted that for a long time. The difference now is that this strategy, this lawfare strategy, if you want to call it that, in the past worked for the elites. It worked for the people in power. They were able to do a lot of this stuff without too much pushback. But the reality is now is, again, this gets back to our fourth turning, generations, discussions. In this day and age, that doesn't work like it used to. So that order, in fact, I was listening recently to an interview with George Friedman, who is the founder of Stratfor, which is a geopolitical research company. He's in his 70s now, but they've been around for a long time. They've done a lot of really good work on foreign affairs and this kind of thing. And he was talking about how basically it parallels what you and I talked about, because we're definitely in that same league as him. It parallels that in the sense that he's saying that the Rooseveltian order, so what came out of World War II, was this new order and organization and set of systems that with a very strong federal government. After the war, we were very united, et cetera, and so the elites basically could run everything at that time, and violating the elites would get you in lots of trouble. That order has completely collapsed, especially since 2008, GFC, and then 2020, COVID. That order has completely collapsed, and so they can't do these things now with impunity and expect the public to just blithely go along and say, okay, well, what's on Archie Bunker now? We're going to just move on to the next thing. There's going to be consequences, and the problem is that we really don't know exactly what those consequences are. It's hard to predict, what is the National Rally Party going to do? It's hard to predict what, can the EU survive? So you look at Giorgia Meloni in Italy, who's the PM down there, and who is a populist prime minister. The media likes to point out, oh, she's having this problem or that problem or the other problem. They focus in on these little things here and there, or and sometimes bigger things. Or Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. You focus in on those, and yet these people are not going away, and their movements are just getting stronger. And so there's
Right.
real danger that Brussels and the folks in these elite power positions are essentially hastening the unraveling of their already tenuous power structure by doing these things, because it just doesn't work anymore. And for me and you, it's like, well, why can't they see this? This is obvious. This is you look at the world, and it's not like Trump is an anomaly. There's Trump, and there's Marine Le Pen, and there's Bolsonaro, and there's Javier Milei in Argentina. You go all over the world, and populist leaders are on the rise, and and nobody knows how to handle them. JD Vance goes to Europe and speaks at the Munich summit, and they're all just offended and upset, and exactly what he said to them is what the EU just did to Marine Le Pen.
Yeah.
Exactly same thing. So basically, somewhere near 40% of the French public was thought to want to vote for her in the upcoming election. You never know until it actually happens, but something like 40%, the largest. It's a plurality, but it's the largest plurality in France. And now,
Meaning they can have the, unlike us, we have two people run. They have like 4 or 5 run,
yeah,
right?
because they're a parliamentary
Yeah. Yeah.
system, and so basically, you run for parliament. Whoever gets the most votes in most seats in parliament, they have a true majority, can just appoint the prime minister, you get the president. So yes, that there's
So they can win that, like the leader is elected with a minority of the vote almost every time. Is that correct?
yeah, and off yes, usually these days because there you'll got the far left party, you got the communist party, you've got the
Right.
national rally, you've got all these different parties, and then they end up in parliamentary systems. You end up having to form a coalition government usually, which nobody wanted to do with Marine Le Pen. So it's going to just throw the whole system into chaos if she won. But they don't realize that they're not avoiding the chaos. They're not going to
Right.
avoid the chaos because the systems of elites, of smart technocratic elites running everything on Earth has collapsed. Everybody knows it doesn't work. We knew it didn't work in 2008 when we saw the result of that. It was reinforced for us when we saw the global government's responses to COVID. And no, it was a bat. Somebody bit a bat in China. It wasn't a lab any place. We didn't give them any gain of function money. No, none of that happened. So
Right.
it's been reinforced with us twice in global staggering amounts that they still want to deny. They still want to say, no, that didn't happen. No, none of this happened. But everybody knows it. It's the emperor has no clothes anymore. But the problem is the emperor doesn't realize he has no clothes. He doesn't realize that Rooseveltian system of elite management has failed, and so
Right.
they're setting themselves up for a worse outcome than they would have had before.
And even if they were able, even if the Rooseveltian, system being dismantled, even if they couldn't see that, I don't understand. They have these consultants who are charging them, millions of dollars a year,
Sure.
hundreds of thousands each for sure.
Right.
Some probably making tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year because they have this great understanding of how all this stuff works, and they can't understand basic fundamental human nature,
Right.
which is if you take somebody out, you create a martyr, and
Yeah.
that martyr has more power. I mean, we're still talking about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King 60 years after they were in JFK, 60 years after they were killed
Yeah.
because they were made martyrs.
Exactly.
And their movements grew substantially when they were taken out. And even though it's not the same to put somebody in prison and remove them from the opportunity to run for political office as killing them, obviously, it's still a version of creating a martyr where
Of
you
course.
remove the opportunity for this person to represent the people who want to be represented. It doesn't mean those people just quietly go away. It means the
No.
opposite in many cases.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about disenfranchising 40% of an entire nation. You
Yeah.
know, if you think all those French people are just going to say, "Oh, we go get croissants," it's not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
And then the other piece that Scott Jennings on CNN has done a remarkable job in the last month or so of pointing this out over and over and over again is the things that they're trying to get people on board with are 80-20 issues, meaning 80% of the population believes one thing and 20% believes the other.
Right.
And they are consistently choosing to fight the 20% battle. I can't think of a single topic that they are on the 80% side of, these, globalists and the
Right.
the progressives and things like that. And they're just doubling down on their tactics of removing people who speak out against it,
Yeah.
but they're still in the minority of the overall populace as far as what should we do,
Right.
and it would be different even if they were on the 80% side on some things, but
Yeah.
they're not. And they do these tactics that are increasingly to just shut people up,
Yep.
creating martyrs who are representing issues that people are really have strong opinions about and have overwhelming popularity on.
Yeah.
Like when you put those pieces together, I don't understand what the heck they're thinking, other than they can just have enough control to just shut people up. Is the only thing I keep coming back to is they
Yeah.
believe that either they are so righteous, and if they just get the message out enough and keep saying things over and over enough, people will start coming around to it, or they have enough power to just through brute force shut people down. I
Yeah.
don't I keep coming back to those two things.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to me it can be anything else.
Well, to pull from French history once again, since we're started with French history, it's very much the same thing that infected another French ruler, Marie Antoinette. The people don't have enough to eat. Let them eat cake. The complete
Right.
disconnect from the times, and the reason I think, I mean, and of course she paid the ultimate price for that, and now we look on her comment with derision, as we properly should, because it was a stupid thing
Yeah.
to say. But it's because
That was 300 years ago. We're still talking about it.
yeah, well, exactly. And it's when people, if you drink your own Kool-Aid for too long, you start to believe that you're all that and that you are better than everybody else. I think there's plenty of people. I think if you, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think if you would ask Barack Obama in a quiet moment, maybe ply him up with some whiskey, say, are you really smarter than everybody else? He'd probably say, well, yeah. What are you talking about? I mean, that's unfair of me to say it that way, but I think that as proxy for the elites, I think that's true. I think a lot of people, you get to those levels and you start to believe your own rhetoric. You start to believe what people are saying about you. And at that point, you think that if somebody comes along like a Trump, or comes along like a Marine Le Pen, or Javier Milei, or whoever, you think, well, it's just an anomaly. It's going to get back to normal soon. It's going to get back to
Right.
normal soon. I mean, we've talked before about like the Sound of Music and the Von Trapp family running through the hills, and the hills are alive with the sound of music, and they're living their happy life with their nanny and everything. And oh yeah, the Nazis are out there, but it'll get back to normal soon. It didn't. It didn't get back to normal.
Yeah.
That's why a
Well,
lot of
and
people never left.
further proof of what you're saying is, we talked about this shortly after the election and leading up to Inauguration Day, I think, or right after Inauguration Day also. The hardcore progressives, the AOCs, the Jasmine Crockett's, the Bernie
Right.
Sanders, and the Elizabeth Warrens, that ilk of the progressive party, they're consistently doing the same thing. And they did it again, I think it was over the weekend, this last weekend, the weekend before, where AOC and Bernie and so they kind of had a road show and whatever. And but what they keep saying is we have to find a better way to deliver our message. We have to find a
Right.
better way to get our message out. We need people to understand. And what they aren't saying is we need to understand what people want and go
Right.
represent that.
Yeah.
And that is a critical, fundamental thing that I believe is so indicative of the problem,
Yeah.
is they are hell bent to get people to understand what they think should be happening.
Yes.
And the populace is saying, no, we elect you to represent what we want. And
Exactly.
that fundamental, they until they make that shift, I think they will have no choice but to do it through brute force
Yeah.
or trickery, um, or some kind of big protests and riots, and what they're doing with Tesla and things like that
Yeah.
is just to scare people and have enough brute force to get them to come around. But I just keep asking myself, why don't they, instead of continuing to say we need people to understand, we need to find a better way to deliver our message, and we need to
Right.
find a new strategy that's going to work to people understand, to get people to understand. I heard them say that literally the other day. We need to find a better way to get people to understand.
Yeah.
Alternatively, you could start asking people what they want and go represent that, and I bet you would win more votes.
Absolutely, but they believe that they are so committed, and this is why it's a religious cause basically for them. Bernie Sanders is a Jew, but I think his real religion is socialism. So
Yeah.
I think when you're in that spot, when you're in the place where a lot of these people are, and you have a belief that is so overwhelmingly powerful, that even if everybody is against you and they don't want you, you're still going to say you're all wrong and I'm right. That's a
Well,
religious
a fundamental
viewpoint.
part of most religions is to go out and convert people. So
Yes,
I would
absolutely.
agree that if it when it is a religion, like, you almost have a
An
duty to
obligation,
go
yeah.
out and convert people to your way of thinking.
Right.
Um, how would you describe, Dave? One of the things I think would be fascinating for Kenny G to hear from us, just two lay people who are not in the political game, so to speak. We're just
Right.
generally talking about the consequence of things going awry in this crisis era we're in. How do you what level of interest do you think most Americans have in what's going on in Europe? So we see things, what I see things anyway on social media, mostly some news outlets occasionally, podcasts I listen to occasionally, it comes up, not much. But you see the stories of the mass immigration that's happened in the
Yeah.
European countries, and the consequences to especially their young women or
Oh
even
yeah.
any
Oh
women
yeah.
actually. Um,
Awful.
there's I saw a thing where there's a I can't remember which city it was. It was a pretty prominent city. I don't know if it was England or Ireland or one of those European countries where the city now has the the big whistles or whatever that like go 5 times a day or something like that that tells
Oh,
the
home
Muslims
prayer.
it's time to pray.
Home
What
prayer.
I don't
Yeah.
know what that's
Yeah.
called, but forgive me for that. But um, these things are just being kind of foisted upon them and forced upon them, and they don't like it. They like their culture the way it was. I don't
Right.
think they're anti-immigrant,
No.
but they're anti-immigrants who are going to come in and change the culture. Like you and I talked last week, the reason you have a government is to protect your stuff and your culture.
Right.
And they've been told by and large, like, just shut up and like your culture, it needs to go away because of we need to undo colonialism or
Right.
whatever the thing is.
Right.
So those stories trickle out. But how would you describe how much the average American is interested or aware of what's happening over there?
Unfortunately, I don't believe most Americans are really aware, of these things. I think there's a greater percentage now because, I think most Americans are to some degree aware that things are not normal on planet Earth. They're not
Yeah.
normal, and by normal, I don't mean how they should be, but not normal in the sense of how they've been, how they've always been in our lifetimes. I mean, my dad might remember, probably not, uh, the time of before Roosevelt. But for the most part, all of us have a sense of normality that grew up during the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, et cetera. And I think more people now are aware that the structures have changed. I mean, there might be a wish or hope that things go back to stability, whatever that is. But I think most people are probably at some level aware that that's not happening. And as a result of that, there's probably a higher degree of awareness about what's happening in Europe than there has been perhaps in the past. But I don't think it's truly widespread yet. And I don't think it'll truly become widespread until the consequences of these things that are happening over there take graphic hold. In other words, if you see, I mean, I think a lot of people will remember in France the Charlie Hebdo bombings, or maybe they'll remember the Yellow Jacket Revolution, a few years back about the about fuel prices in France and fuel taxes and all this. Maybe some will remember that, but until there's something, big, if until there's like a complete super crisis that happens, either the European Union collapses or, all of Eastern Europe says, forget it, we're going on our own. We're going to be Eastern Europe and Brussels. You can take a flying whatever, then I don't think most people are going to become aware. But I think I think there are some big bumps in the road coming as a result of these things. I do think that's going to come a year or two tomorrow, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a tremendously sticky situation that's been created because, I don't think race matters. I
No.
do think culture matters.
Yes.
And again, whether you agree or like it or whatever, some cultures value human rights and women's rights and
Right.
children's rights more than others.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you can, no different than we tried for 20 years to get Afghanistan to come around to our way of thinking and failed miserably.
Yeah.
I think the same thing will happen with people coming into Ireland and trying to change their culture. They're
Yeah.
they're they're not going to like it. They're going to resist, and they will resort to guerrilla tactics if necessary, like we saw in Vietnam
Sure.
as we were trying to change their like. There's there's there other than total just like taking over a thing like like you could argue happened to the American Indian when
Sure.
Europeans moved in here and like just decimated the whole culture.
Right.
Short of that, there's not a whole lot of evidence of how you do this in a way that everyone's happy
No. No.
or excited or grateful or enthusiastic. It doesn't seem to work that way.
Yeah.
And now they have all these people there who don't share their values. How do you undo that? I don't even know how you undo it because
No.
you can't have racism, but you can have the desire to move people out of your culture who don't want your culture to succeed and want your culture to be thwarted or dominated or
Yeah.
or removed. I don't know how they get themselves out of this situation. In
Well,
your, I mean, we have our own issues here, but it seems to me my perception, based on not a whole lot of information, so I'll be upfront about that. But my perception is it's way worse over there as far as the amount of infiltration, if you will, of people who don't share their values coming in and like dictating how they're supposed to live their lives. And their governments, it seems to me, are just more or less like telling the locals, shut up, it's okay,
right.
and kind of turning their eye when these immigrants do things that 15 years ago people would have been sent to prison for a long time for doing.
Yeah, and I think the way this plays out, there's a Jewish proverb, and I won't get it exactly right, but it says something to the effect of, "If you are soft when you should be hard, you will end up being cruel when you should be kind." And so the
Yeah.
way that this will probably play out, in my estimation, is eventually it'll reach a tipping point with some of these things that are happening in these different countries, and that tipping point will probably turn violent. I mean, I hope not. I hope that there can be some kind of gradual rebalancing of, okay, everybody's got 5 years to learn French, and if you don't learn French and you're tested, you're going to have to go to some. You would hope that, but typically that's not how these things work. How these things work typically is, I've been ignored for 20 years. You're destroying my country, destroying my culture. I'm just a blacksmith and I work down the road doing this work, but I'm done. I'm over, and I'm going to I'm going to pick up my pitchfork like they did, like we did here in America when the Brits just pushed us too far.
Yeah.
The Declaration of Independence, people are predisposed to suffer evil as long as evils are sufferable. But there comes a time when evils are no longer sufferable, and then it's not a gradual moving backwards. Then it's a rubber band snapping back into place, and there's going
Right.
to be pain. And this is the story of humanity. This is how it's always worked, and I'm sure in Europe it's going to work probably the same way. You're probably going to have and what they're trying to do, what the like with the banning of the AFD in, nobody wants to work with the AFD in Germany, the far right, quote unquote, party in Germany. They don't like the National Rally in France. People don't like Georgia Maloney, and some people in Italy. They're trying to prevent those people from getting to power. When they get into power, they will probably be in power in a snap, in a fast, in a potentially doing things that I wouldn't like, that I wouldn't want them to
Yeah.
see. But that's how this stuff works. That's how it rolls. It always has.
Yeah. Well, that's how, Nicholas II went down. He
Yes.
just kept ignoring the needs of the people, kept ignoring the needs of the people, and
Yeah.
he thought he was put in place by God, and
Yeah.
like this is just the way it's supposed to be. And finally, people had enough, and he went away.
And that's the end of that. Yeah. And
Um,
that's sad because but that's, again, it's human. It's going to happen the same way in Kenny G's day. So because
yeah,
the technology will be different, AI will be around, whatever's going to happen, I don't know, but as long as human beings are still the dominant force on Earth, these are how these cycles work, and these are how these crises end up resolving themselves. They don't resolve themselves with okay, we've banned all the bad guys, now it's going to be back to normal. It doesn't. It's never worked. If I had a
yeah,
chance to talk to any of these smart people, which they would never talk to me because I'm just a low life guy from Graham, Washington, that runs a marketing business. But if I ever have a chance to talk to him, I'd say, tell me historically, what's the precedent for what you're doing working? Give me 5 examples, just 5 examples in 10,000 years of human history. Tell me what they are. And they wouldn't be able to do it because it doesn't exist.
right, yeah, yeah. It's fascinating that the corners that societies have been painted into and leadership has been painted. Like it
Right.
seems like they've unnecessarily boxed themselves into places that are
Yeah.
going to be tremendously difficult to get out of, which again I think is the whole thesis of the fourth turning, is
Yep.
things just begin falling apart and people kick the can down the road, then kick the can down the road, and pretty soon you can't kick it any further, and that's when the crisis unfolds, and I suspect we're getting ever more closer to that.
We are.
One thing I do want to mention, that if I a great lesson I think was learned yesterday in the Wisconsin election. So you
Oh,
and I are recording
yes.
this on Wednesday. Yesterday they had their special election, whatever.
Right.
The progressive Supreme Court justice was elected,
Yep.
and simultaneously they voted to make voter ID part of the constitution of the state.
Exactly.
And I look at that and I say, this is a fantastic lesson for Democrats. Now, again, I in the old days being 15 years ago,
Yeah.
I would have been classified as a Democrat, not a progressive, but a Democrat. I probably would be more libertarian, but if I had to choose, but if somebody would choose the two for me, they probably would have put me in more of a Democrat slot,
Right.
but a very conservative Democrat, right? Now, by today's standards, I'm far right extreme MAGA.
Extremist, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, by today's standard, I don't think my views have changed all that much, but by today's standards, I'm way off the charts, far right. Okay, I can live with that. Whatever. I don't care about that stuff. I do care about having a functioning political system where people are competing for the best ideas. I do care about that. I don't want a uniparty that's conservative any more than I want one that's progressive.
Oh, agreed.
And I think that there's a lesson for my friends who are Democrats in high place. Let me rephrase that. There's lessons for the Democrat Party to learn from that election. I think people in the same election chose a progressive person to be on the Supreme Court and still wanted voter ID in their state constitution, where it's required now by law that they have to get voter ID. Now, why would that be? Well, because people still like progressive ideas, but they really want voter ID. Yeah. If they can't accept that, which thus far they have not been able to, I think they're going to continue having 21% favorability rankings or whatever that poll is that we keep hearing about. As long as they keep ignoring what's plainly being put in front of them, I think they're going to struggle. And this isn't just the Democrats of 2025. This is, again, in 60 years from now, 70 years from now, 80 years from now, when Kenny G is going through his own crisis era, the same thing will be happening in that era. Who the parties are and what the topics are, I have no way to know. But the same things are going to be happening, just like with what we started with, which is people are just not willing to accept what's plainly being put right in front of them. The emperor has no clothes. It's plain as day what people want. Why wouldn't you just get on board with that and represent what they want? If you want to get elected, that's how you do it. If you don't want to do that, the only alternative is trickery, coercion, force, bribery, lying. Like there's these other tactics that are not desirable. But the easy path is being being laid out. Quit fighting these things that people want, and you'll get a lot more of what you want.
We brought him up before 2-3 weeks ago. The guy that understands this, the guy on the left who understands this better than anybody else is Gavin Newsom. I mean, I don't like Gavin Newsom. I've never liked Gavin Newsom. I hate what he's done to California, but kudos to him in terms of having his ear to the ground, understanding what's going on. I mean, I heard a quote from him just today saying, he's got all these conservatives on his podcast. He said, I understand where you're coming from. Our cancel culture has canceled you. And he's like saying it out loud. He's like, the Democrats for years, you talk to Gavin Newsom, interview him 4 years in the past. There's no such thing as cancel culture. It doesn't exist. It's a right-wing fantasy spurred on by delusions of MAGA or something. But he's a smart dude. He is actually probably the future of the Democratic Party if they don't kill him along the way for for violating their religion.
I agree he's going through the motions of doing all the things he should be doing. I don't believe that he is sincere about one bit.
No, I don't either. No, I don't either. No, I don't. He has not had an aha, moment on Damascus.
But he can read the polls. He can read the polls and react to them. There's no question.
To get where he wants to go, I think is doing what he needs to do. And I still don't trust him based on history, but he's smart. And that's actually probably the most dangerous thing is a smart guy like that.
And I would argue there's another name we could throw out there who I think is probably a little more sincere, way less influential, and that would be Fetterman.
Sure.
He has been willing to stand again. I talk regularly about what they need, that they being the progressive Democrat Party, is somebody who's willing to take the tomatoes and stand up and, like, even when people are shouting at you and telling you you're a Nazi for going against your own party, like just doing what you think is right. I think he has illustrated or demonstrated what that would have to look like. I don't think he has the horsepower to ever run for president. He's certainly not as influential as Gavin Newsom, but I believe he's at least more sincere.
I do.
That being said, I agree with you 100%. Newsom is doing the things necessary to be relevant in 2.5 years, whenever the next presidential election campaign season kicks off.
He is.
And he's changing his tone and posture on some stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe he will be the guy that is willing to stand up, and it would take a guy with his influence or a complete outsider like another Trumpian kind of guy on the progressive side, just a complete outsider to come in and be like, I don't care about your old school politics. Here's what we all know to be true, and let's just move forward with that.
Right.
But of the insiders, I think he might be the one that could pull it off by shape shifting and morphing and.
Well, and he's doing it at exactly the right time too, because come 2.5 years from now, when he says all this stuff, then it's going to be more difficult for people like you and I to say, "Well, this is all." No. I've been saying this for years.
I've been saying it for 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. So
I learned our lesson after 2024. I know what people want. Yeah, you're right. He's gonna have all the right things to say.
He will.
All right. Well, as Dave mentioned in the beginning, if you think there's something we're talking about that we completely missed the mark on, we'd love to hear about that. Or if you think there's something we're talking about that is completely representative of how you think things are, we'd love to hear that too. You can do that at unsilentpodcast.com, or you can go to Rumble. They have a great comment section there. And until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.